So to recap where we've come from in Joshua, remember when we started this at the beginning of the summer, Moses had led the Israel and out of Egypt. So we're out of Egypt and they're on the verge of the promised land, and Moses has gone up and down the right side of the Jordan River, wiped out Sihon and Og and all the people that are there, and they're getting ready to cross into Jordan. That's the beginning of Joshua. They cross the Jordan, they come in the promised land. There's problems because there's a lot of people still living there. They get wiped out, basically, and they settled. We settled them in a couple weeks ago. And then last week we settled in, finally, the last tribe, Levi, which against the odds, God chooses Levi to be the one to maintain the kind of reverence to God distributed through the entire country. Levi, who has this horribly tarnished background of this incredibly horrible violence. That's what the family's known for. And so those who know violence and have repented of that violence are now in charge of bringing that whole idea of repentance and restoration of God to the nation of Israel. It's a crazy kind of thing. Today, you would think you could finish the book. We should close the book. We got all the tribes settled. We got the Levites settled in their cities. Everything's just fine. Let's just finish the book and go home and we're done because we're moved in. But there's some business to do about this. And the business has to do with the fact now that they're moved into the land, the biggest threat is not the people who used to live there. The biggest threat is themselves. So we'll spend the last couple of weeks talking about how God tries to get them to understand that their life will be prosperous there as long as God's in the center of the plan. When God's not in the center of the plan, prosperity's gone. It's not the land itself that brings prosperity. It's the presence of God and their relationship with him. So we're going to look at that today, the first. And here's just an eye-opener about the fact that if you do this wrong, it's not just that life gets bad. It's that you could actually end up killing each other. So here's where we are. So we're living in the land, lesson number 1. This is just a couple chapters to get you sort of situated in the land. And we are bristling for war already. We've only been living there a couple weeks, and we're ready to kill each other. From who? The Hivites and the Perizzites and the Canaanites? No, from themselves. Civil war looms on. So we're going to see how that works and how you can get away. This is the recap. We started way here on the bottom right. 5 months of preparation to go into the land. Then we took about, I think it was 7 years to conquer the land in chapter 6 through 13. Then we did about 8 years to settle the land and also establish the special cities of the Levites, which we did last week. And then today we start this last section. We'll look just at chapter 22 today. Not setting our record for the number of chapters in a week because we did that when the settlement. We did all those chapters in settlement in 1 week. Not today. We'll do 1 chapter, so we're okay. And we're just going to talk about the realities of living in this land and what could potentially happen. So here's how we'll just dive right into it and see what's going on. By the way, the map on the right, the green area is the traditional promised land that's west of the Jordan River. But 2.5 tribes ended up going on the yellow side, Reuben, Gad, and half of Manasseh. So anyway, that's how he starts out. At that time, Joshua summoned the Reubenites and the Gadites and the half tribe of Manasseh. Remember, that's those people on the right. And he said to those guys on the right, he says this in verse 2, "You've kept all that Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you. You obeyed my voice in all that I commanded you. You have not forsaken your brothers these many days down to this day. But have been careful to keep the charge of the Lord your God." So he's saying to these guys, remember there was this original thing when those people on that side, on the right side of the Jordan, when they saw that land over there, and they are primarily livestock tribes, right? When they went up and down there with Moses, they said, this is great pasture land. So they went to Moses and they said, can we live here eventually on the right side? Because it's great pasture land instead of crossing the Jordan into the west. Can we? And Moses at first says, well, why do you want to do that? Are you going away from God? No, we're staying with God, but this is, and Moses says, fine. And then they have the same pitch they make with Joshua. Remember, Moses said we could live on this right side. So now we are at the end, and they're going to go back home. So Joshua's talking to them. He says, you've done everything we asked you, because remember, before we crossed the Jordan, even though you guys didn't need to cross the Jordan because you're living on the other side, you're living on the right side, but we said to you, you need to send all your troops with us on the left side of the Jordan and clean out all the people on that side. And once we've cleaned them all out, then you can go back home over here. You just can't stay here. And they said, yep, that's what we'll do. So that's what Joshua's referring to. They did that. They supported the other 9.5 tribes. They helped in all those wars on the left side. And so Joshua's saying, since you've done that and you've been careful to keep the charge of the Lord your God, this is what's going to happen now. Verse 4. And now the Lord your God has given rest to your brothers. He's speaking primarily to people on the left of the Jordan, as he promised them. Therefore, turn and go to your tents in the land where your possession lies, on the right, which Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you on the other side of the Jordan. Okay, that's cool. There is sort of a other side of the tracks mentality going on here, though. And we've talked about this before, because you got people on the classic left side, the west side of the Jordan. That's the classic promised land. The ones on the right side, on the east side, not quite as classic, but when you look at the promise to Abraham for land, it's included. But it's really an other side of the tracks kind of thing. So there was always this sense that the people that were on the left were more godly, and people on the right were, well, they're kind of on the edge. And that's starting to brew today. This prejudice is starting to brew. So they're going to go over there and finally settle after now they've finished all the wars on the left and everyone else on the left has been settled. They're going to finally get to go back home. So that's what Joshua is telling them to do. So they do that and they all lived happily ever after. I can't use that anymore because I'm lying. Every time I put that up there, we're lying. Yeah, no, they didn't live happily. Well, because, keep reading, verse 5. He says to them, here's a charge, only, look, when you go back there, be very careful to observe the commandment of the law that Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you. What is it? To love the Lord your God, to walk in all his ways, to keep his commandments, and to cling to him and to serve him with all your heart and with all your soul. Do you notice what the central focus of that is? It's relationship with God. And we're going to come back to this next week as well, because this is central to how prosperity works in this land. It's not God saying to these folks, saying, look, you're going into a land that you didn't, you're going to inherit vineyards that you didn't plant, you're going to inherit farms that you didn't develop, you're going to have houses that you didn't build. He doesn't say, go in there and take care of all that great stuff that I gave to you and be good stewards of the land. There's nothing about being stewards of the land. It's all about, be very careful about your relationship with God. That's key. And we'll come back to this next week in big measure, because that's how he closes out Joshua. So he's just charging, when you go over there, just make sure God's in the center of your life. So you get to verse 7. Now to the one half of the tribe of Manasseh, Moses has given a possession in Bashan, which is up in that upper right part. It's the Golan Heights today. But to the other half of Manasseh, Joshua gave a possession beside his brothers in the land west of the Jordan. So remember, Manasseh got split in half. We don't know exactly why it got split in half, but part of them are on the other side of the tracks, and part of them are on the good side of the tracks, which could actually cause some division right here. So that's what he's talking. He's recapping for us what's going on here in case we forgot our history. So when Joshua sent them away to their homes and blessed them, he said to them, this is Joshua speaking as they're taken off, go back to your tents with much wealth and with very much livestock, which to them is a big deal, with silver and gold and bronze and iron and with much clothing, divide the spoil of your enemies with your brothers. So they're going to go back home and they're taking the spoil that they collected from all the wars that took place on the left. Just makes sense. So go and share it with them when you go back there. Pretty straightforward. So the people of Reuben and the people of Gad and the half-tribe of Manasseh, they returned home, parting from the people of Israel at Shiloh, which is in the land of Canaan, which is the left side, right? And to go to the land of Gilead. Gilead classically is everything on the right side. There's that song, there is a balm in Gilead. Gilead is everything to the right of the Jordan, by and large. So they're going to go over there, their own land of which they had possessed themselves by command of the Lord through Moses. So, this is like a everyone lives happily ever after scenario. They're going back over there, and so that's what they do. And now they lived happily ever after. It's just not working anymore. That's a lie. Got to come up with something else. I'll think of something. So, no. Did they live happily ever after? They ought to have, because now everybody is settled. They've gone back home on the right side. Everyone on the left side settled over there. The Levites who don't get land, but they get cities, they're settled. Everybody's settled. What could be wrong now? And all the bad guys are vanquished, pretty much, although there's vestiges of them and stuck in little places. But by and large, the wars are done. What could possibly go wrong now? And we come back to that Pogo quote. We met the enemy, and it's us. Now watch this. This is just craziness. Well, things don't really turn out well. If you keep reading, verse 10, so when they came to the region of the Jordan that's in the land of Canaan, which, they went right up to where they're going to cross out of Canaan. They crossed the Jordan River. They come right up to that edge of leaving Canaan. They came to the region of the Jordan that's in the land of Canaan. The people of Reuben and the people of Gad, the yellow people over here, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, they built there an altar by the Jordan, an altar of imposing size. It's time to build a rock altar. So right over there, they build an altar, right as they're getting ready to cross out of the left side. But it's an imposing size, so it's a big imposing size. Okay, it's an imposing size, and it's over there to kind of commemorate coming home finally from the wars on the left. And so actually, if you have one of these ESV study Bibles, right at that point in chapter 22, they've got this great table, because you're probably thinking, have we done rock memorials before? Well, yes, we have. How many? 7 of them. Well, we're actually on the number 6 of the 7. But that's why study Bibles are so great, because if you're reading this, you're saying to yourself, I've seen this before. I don't want to have to go back and reread Joshua and find out where it is. So they've tabulated for you. And before you say, wait, I don't have one of those Bibles, but I did sign up to get one, we have them on order, but the manufacturer's having problems making them. So they're still coming. Don't worry. But that's why study Bibles are fun, because just about the time you have this question about stone memorials, they've got a table for you. Woo! And we remember a lot of them if you think back. But this one in the whole list is number 6 out of 7 in the history of making stone memorials in this whole process in Joshua. You remember there was a really big one that happened when remember Achan, who died because he took stuff out of Jericho, and then he hid it under his tent, and bad deal. So the next battle they had at Ai, or however you want to pronounce it, went south because, anyway, you remember all that stuff? Well, when Achan died, they built a gigantic memorial over him of stones, saying, we shouldn't forget this. Some of the stones are memorial stones in that sense. And then I thought, well, wait a second. I know disaster's coming because of this altar. I wonder if that imposing size thing is an issue. Maybe they just made it too big and kind of proud, We're going to build a stone memorial about going to our land and how God has been blessing us. Let's make it the biggest one we've ever made ever before. Yeah. And everyone look at that and say, that's the biggest one we've ever seen. Remember, we made some when we crossed the Jordan originally, and then we put a whole bunch on top of Achan, and then we put a whole bunch on top of those 5 kings. Yeah, we'll make a biggest one ever. And that caused kind of like jealousy. Well, this is where Bible tools help, because I looked at that word imposing right there, of imposing size. It's this Hebrew word, gadol, and of the 7 times these stone things are made, it uses that word 5 out of the 7 times. So, especially when you're talking about when those 5 kings got kind of killed and stuff like that, they made an imposing size stone memorial. So, this particular one, at least in the words, doesn't sound like it's really any different than the ones that have come before it. So what they're trying to say is they didn't make a little like bread box size bunch of stones. We don't have bread boxes anymore, do we? I need a new metaphor for that too. But then it's not a small kind of thing. It's not a Kleenex size box. But it's a big thing, right? And they use that, it's used most of the times these stone memorials are there. They're meant to be big and something that kind of arrests you. And you say, why is that there? Your children say, why is that there? And you say, well, because that was the day that we left the wars in the left and we went back to our homes of the grazing areas on the right. And so we just want to remember that God did this. So we're just doing one of these things. That's all we're doing. So the size is really not an issue right here, but it's gonna be an issue anyway. Watch this. That's my best picture I could find on the internet for a bunch of stones. I don't know if that's imposing. I don't know. But every time something momentous happened in the life of Israel in this settling process, they would commemorate it, and that's a good word to use. So the memory would tell them this is what happened here. So that's what they're doing here as well. So, but man, is this going to cause a lot of problems. I mean, wait until you see this. The people of Israel, and we say that's the left side largely. When the people of Israel heard it, they said, behold, the people of Reuben and the people of Gad and the half-tribe of Manasseh built an altar at the frontier of the land of Canaan in the region about the Jordan on the side that belongs to the people of Israel. So you can already hear in their voice, like, did you hear? They built the stone altar. And they built it on our land. Hear that? Israel's land. They built it on our land. And what are they doing building a stone memorial for anyway? I mean, wait. Are they maybe building an altar so they can worship God in a place that's not at the tabernacle? hey, what's going on? So this raises a ton of suspicion. And it gets worse. So when the people of Israel, left side, when the people of Israel heard of it, the whole assembly of the people of Israel gathered at Shiloh to make war against them. Blah. Okay? Now you might think this is a little jumping the gun. And if you're thinking that, you'd be right. But now you got to remember where they came from, because remember when that thing with Achan went down, when he kept that silver and gold and that really cool piece of clothing, whatever it looked like, when he did that, it was a big burned memory in their existence. They said, we got to be careful what we do. We really got to be careful. God sees everything. So if our cousins over here, these 2.5 tribes, if they do something go south and they start to go away from God, God might hold us accountable too. So in a very respectably righteous way, they say, we got to stop. We got to cut this in the quick right now. This is bad, because it looks like the evidence is telling us that our cousins on the right side of the Jordan, on the other side of the tracks, are getting ready to depart from God. They're actually going to start sacrificing in a place other than God says it's okay to do. So we're going to nip this in the bud right now. So they gathered for war. What? You'd think after all the warring they did all over the place that they'd finally say, hey, we're finally home now. Let's raise some goats and sheep. Let's have some grandchildren. Let's just do all this. And they're saying, nope. Since we're ready to go, let's get all the army together in Shiloh, and we're going to cross over there, and we're just going to whip their butts, and we're going to tell them you cannot go away from God, or else we're all going to be held accountable. So that's what's going on now. Wow. What a bunch of overactivity. Well, let me read for you what goes on after this point. And I forgot to bring my script, so I'm going to have to do this in kind of a crazy sort of way here. Over here. This is going to be much more dovetail, but somewhere in Peach Days yesterday I lost my script, so I'm going to have to do it right out of the Bible. Okay, so I'll pick up where they found out. So when they came to the region of the Jordan, that's the land of Canaan, the people of Reuben, the people of Gad, the half-tribe of Manasseh, they built there an altar by the Jordan, an altar of imposing size, and the people of Israel heard of it and said, behold, the people of Reuben, people of Gad, half-tribe of Manasseh, they've built an altar at the frontier of the land of Canaan, in the land beyond the Jordan, on the side that belongs to the people of Israel. And when the people of Israel heard it, the whole assembly of the people of Israel gathered at Shiloh to make war. And then the people of Israel sent to the people of Reuben and the people of Gad and the half-tribe of Manasseh in the land of Gilead, they sent Phinehas, he's the highest religious guy at the time, the son of Eleazar the priest, and with him 10 chiefs, one from each of the tribal families of Israel, every one of them the head of a family and among the clans of Israel. And they came to the people of Reuben and the people of Gad and the half-tribe of Manasseh in the land of Gilead, and they said to them, thus says the whole congregation of the Lord, what is this breach of faith that you have committed against the God of Israel in turning away this day from following the Lord by building yourselves an altar this day in rebellion against the Lord? Have we had not enough sin at Peor, and which even yet has not been cleansed ourselves, for which there have come a plague upon the congregation of the Lord, that you too must turn away and turn away from following the Lord? And if you too rebel against the Lord today, then tomorrow he'll be angry with the whole congregation of Israel. They're afraid that God's going to come down. What is this breach of faith that you have committed? And they're doing this just based on this altar. That's the whole thing. What is it, this breach you've committed against God in turning away this day from following the Lord by building yourselves an altar this day in rebellion against the Lord? Oh, man. If you rebel against the Lord today, then tomorrow he'll be angry with the whole congregation. But now, if the land of your possession is unclean, well, pass over into the Lord's land where the Lord's tabernacle stands. He's saying, if you're dissatisfied with your land on the right side of the Jordan because it's unclean, you can come back to our side. You can come back on the east side of the tracks. I mean, if that's the problem, if the problem is you don't want to go over there, if that land is unclean, then come back to our side. You can take for yourselves a possession among us. So if that's the problem, you can come live with us. Don't worry about it. Only, listen, don't rebel against the Lord or make us as rebels by building for yourselves an altar other than the altar of the Lord our God. For instance, don't you remember they say? Didn't Achan, the son of Zerah, break faith in the matter of the devoted things, and wrath fell upon all the congregation of Israel? And hey, he didn't perish alone for his iniquity. See what they're saying? You're going to take us all down. You're going to take us all down because you're building an altar to sacrifice on, and you're not supposed to do that. There's only one altar for sacrifices. That's at the tabernacle. Don't do this thing because you might take all of us down. So they got the lesson from Achan really well. Listen, if you too rebel against the Lord today, then tomorrow he'll be angry with the whole congregation of Israel. So they're concerned for their well-being. I mean, and rightly so, because God's told them, you guys need to stay tight and you need to be following God, and you need to be on top of things when people even start hinting about living life without God. And if you're living without God, it's being evidenced, they're saying, by this altar, which is not supposed to be used for sacrifices. So don't do this thing. So good for these guys. So they went to check it out. So then the people of Reuben and the people of Gad, let me see if I've got this. Oh, yeah, let me finish it. I read this for you. But don't rebel against the Lord or make us as rebels by building for yourselves an altar other than the altar of the Lord our God. So that's really the issue. And they're sort of misinterpreting. Didn't Achan, the son of Zerah, break faith in the matter of the devoted things? Wrath fell upon all congregation of Israel. And he did not perish alone for his iniquity. So they're freaked out. They're freaked out that these guys who are going to the other side of the tracks, on the non-classic Israel side, are showing signs of leaving God by making an alternate altar on their way out of town. And their cousins on the left side are all freaked out. So that's where we're at right now. So I think, we're on this side now. So the people of Reuben, the people of Gad, that's the ones that live on the right side, and the half-tribe of Manasseh said in answer to the heads of the families of Israel, the mighty one, God, is Lord. The mighty one, God, is Lord. He knows, and let Israel itself know, if it was in rebellion or in breach of faith against the Lord. Well, don't spare us today. For building an altar to turn away from following the Lord, don't spare us. Or if we did not so, if we did so to offer burnt offerings or grain offerings or peace offerings on it, well, may the Lord himself take vengeance on us. No. But listen, we did it from fear that in time to come your children might say to our children, well, what have you to do with the Lord, the God of Israel? For the Lord has made the Jordan, a boundary between us and you, the people of Reuben and the people of Gad. So you have no portion in the Lord. So they're saying, look, we built this because in the future, our kids and their kids will forget what's happened here. And so we built this because we're afraid that your kids will say to our kids who live on the other side of the Jordan, you're not part of God's people. You're on the other side of the tracks. So we want to leave a memorial stone here to remind them, no, even though we're on the other side of the tracks, we're still part of the Lord's portion and all this stuff. So they're saying we did this so that what's happening right now wouldn't happen. That's the irony. We did this so this wouldn't happen with our children, but it's happening between us, the adults. You see it? It's just craziness. It's craziness. No, we did it from fear that in time to come, your children might say to our children, well, what have you to do with the Lord, the God of Israel? Huh? So your children might make our children cease to worship the Lord. Well, parents, you have more to fear than your kids misunderstanding. You yourselves misunderstand. And in trying to forestall this, they brought on themselves this gigantic misunderstanding. Therefore, we said, this is them going on, let's build an altar, not for burnt offering, not for sacrifice. That's a one-time place. It's at the tabernacle and eventually at the temple. Not for that, but to be a witness between us and you and between our generations after us, that we do perform the service of the Lord in his presence with our burnt offerings and sacrifices and peace offerings. So your children will not say to our children in time to come, you have no portion in the Lord. And we thought, if this should be said to us or to our descendants in time to come, we should say, behold, talking about this stone thing, behold, the copy of the altar of the Lord, which our fathers made, but not the actual thing. But it's not for burnt offerings. It's not for sacrifice, but to be a witness between us and you. Look, far be it from us that we should rebel against the Lord and turn away this day from following the Lord by building an altar for burnt offering and grain offering or sacrifice other than the altar, the Lord our God, that stands before his tabernacle. So they're defending what they're doing, basically. Let's build an altar, not for burnt offering, nor for sacrifice, but to be a witness between us and you and between our generations after us. So your children will not say to our children in time to come, you have no portion in the Lord. So they're trying to forestall a gigantic misunderstanding because they live on the wrong side of the tracks. That's all it is. And in trying to put this witness there to commemorate what's going on, they have triggered a civil war. So in one sense, it's sort of a good deal because they anticipated that this misunderstanding would come up. It's a bad deal because they didn't realize it'd come up now. They thought it would wait a couple generations. It's causing it right now. Good defense on their part. So, far be it from us that we should rebel against the Lord and turn away. So they're saying, we're with the Lord. We're going to stay with the Lord. That's our intention through all of this. We're going to go to where the tabernacle is, and we're going to offer our sacrifices there because that's what God's asked us to do. We're not making a tabernacle altar 2.0. No, we're not doing that. We are still with you guys in all of this. Great misunderstanding here. So then back on the other side, we come back to Phinehas. Phinehas the priest and the chiefs of the congregation, the heads of the families of Israel who were with him, who came in this confrontation. They heard the words that the people of Reuben, the people of Gad, the people of Manasseh spoke, and it was good in their eyes. And Phinehas, the son of Eleazar the priest, said to the people of Reuben and the people of Gad and the people of Manasseh, listen, today we know that the Lord is in our midst because you have not committed this breach of faith against the Lord. You have not committed this breach of faith against the Lord. Now you have delivered the people of Israel from the hand of the Lord. And that's an interesting phrase because when he's saying Israel, he's talking about the people on the right of the Jordan. You have delivered the people on the right side of the Jordan from the hand of the Lord. That is, we almost committed a grievous evil in going to war against you. And because of your words right now, you have nipped this in the bud and the civil war is not going to happen. If we had engaged you because we thought you were going, south, we would have been in error and God would have taken it out of our flesh because we would have overreacted. But because you've been straight with us today, you have delivered us from the hand of the Lord, from the misdeeds. So then Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the priest, and the chiefs, they returned from the people of Reuben, from the people of Gad, and the land of Gilead, to the land of Canaan, to the people of Israel, and they brought back word to them. Good. And the report was good in the eyes of the people of Israel. And the people of Israel blessed God and spoke no more of making war against them to destroy the land where the people of Reuben and the people of Gad had settled. And the people of Reuben and the people of Gad called the altar Witness. Flies. The people of Reuben and people of Gad called the altar Witness, for they said, it's a witness between us that the Lord is God. It's not a replacement tabernacle sacrifice place. It's a witness. It was meant to just be a witness so that in future generations, this misunderstanding wouldn't happen. And in fact, the misunderstanding doesn't happen for the life of Israel between the left and right. But it does to the north and south. We'll talk about that in a second. So let's kind of do a wrap up on this. Because this is a fascinating thing. We just need to collect our thoughts and make some observations. And maybe you're making some right now. But this is eminently practical in so many ways because we are prone to misunderstanding each other. Okay, there we go. Yeah, we are. And I mean, let me just list a couple things that came to mind. You might have had some. Righteous actions can be misunderstood. Okay, so what the people of the right were trying to do was something that was very godly and very righteous. They had enough understanding to know that this misunderstanding may come up, but probably in our kids' lifetimes, not ours. And the history of how we got here and why we're not on the left holy side of the Jordan as opposed to being on the right unholy side, they're gonna misinterpret this. And people on the left side of the Jordan, our kids, are going to look at us and our kids and say, you guys must not be Israel anymore because you're on the wrong side of the Jordan. Right? So they anticipated this, and they did something with a very godly intent. Let's put this commemoration here so that in the future our kids will ask, why is that there? And that's because we'll say, even though we're living on the wrong side of the tracks, we're still part of the people of Israel. And this is the commemoration of that. That's all that is. And it's a commemoration for the people of the kids on the left side. So, have your righteous actions ever been misunderstood? All the time. I was going to give you a list of ones that I've undergone. I mean, it's just crazy how misunderstood you can be. I always go back to the Tower of Babel, where God confused the languages, and I'm thinking, you know, God, if you hadn't confused the languages, we probably wouldn't have these misunderstandings. However, all of my misunderstandings in my history have been in English. So that probably doesn't figure in. So there is something about fallen hearts that tends to want to misunderstand righteous things from other people. So you have and you will be misunderstood for things that you do from righteous motivations. It's just going to happen. But misunderstanding can afflict a righteous people as well. So I think in both cases between these two peoples, there was righteous intent on both sides. I mean, even the people on the left who are coming to say, you know, we got to be careful what we do when people are kind of drifting away from the Lord. So they assembled an army to do a cleansing. I mean, that's how serious they were about it. That was not wrong. That wasn't hot-headed. That was just in concert with God was saying, you need to be careful about those influences. This is the reason why, God says, I had you go through the entire land and flush all those people out, because if they stay in your midst, the danger to you isn't the fact that they'll kind of kill you in your sleep. The danger to you is that they'll lead you away from the Lord. And that's the real danger here. So, if that's the case, and if you fought all these people because they have an influence, cancerously speaking, of leading you away from the Lord, well then, if people in your own camp start to do that, you need to be just as unremitting in your approach to it. Because leading you away from the Lord, that's the big danger. So I think on both sides, I like to try and assign blame in this kind of misunderstanding, but I can't really. I think both sides operated godly in terms of, but the misunderstanding's there. So here's the deal, and you already know this. If you do things from a righteous motivation, you can and will be misunderstood. And if you look at what other people do, even though you're righteous, you may misunderstand. Now, in the political discourse of today, there's not this thought, like what I'm just saying right here, that, you know, regardless of your motivations on one side or the other, that you may be wrong either in being misinterpreted or that you are actually doing the misinterpretation. There's no sense that everyone's prone to that. What happens in the conflict that goes on today is one side says, well, our motivations and our ethics are pure, so therefore you must be wrong and unethical and impure. So what happens is the two sides basically point fingers that since my motivations are good and my motivations are highly ethical and moral, yours must be wrong and you must be unethical and immoral because we're in conflict. So it basically paints the other side as being, you know, unpure and my side is pure. And so when you have two sides pointing at each other saying, I'm pure, that means you must not be. No, I'm pure, that means you must not be. So then this finger pointing happens and you get what we call today tribalism that goes on. You get what we call the cancel culture that goes on right now, where you try and cancel out everyone on the other side. Yeah, I mean, this is what you get when you presume that you and you alone are righteous, so the other people must be dirtbags. However, in this case, we see that neither side are dirtbags. They're operating under almost an honest misunderstanding. Both sides are prone to either being misunderstood or to misunderstanding. And their hearts, I think, are in the right place. So from a humble perspective, God brings us to that too. You can misunderstand what other people are doing, and you will be misunderstood. But don't you dare go say, because I'm holy and righteous, I'm right and you're wrong. You got to understand that whichever side you're on, you're prone to this problem. It's your reaction after that makes the difference. That's what made the difference in today. The reaction after the fact is what makes the difference. Let's take a look. A few more thoughts. You need to never trust your own understanding about a situation without some dialogue. Baby, I'll tell you, that should be plastered in the news right now. We need to have a dialogue on this thing. We need to talk about this. But in the same place, in this really twisted sense of what we have today, when you claim that the other side is unrighteous and unpure and unethical and immoral, who would ever talk and have a dialogue with someone who's like that? I mean, after all, I'm right and you're wrong. So actually the function of dialogue doesn't make any sense. And it doesn't when you put it in that kind of black and white perspective. There's no reason for dialogue because you're not even cutting any slack for the fact that you might be misinterpreting. Because after all, I'm right and you're wrong. So, but here again, we see from a humble perspective, anyone can misunderstand, and it has nothing to do with righteousness or unrighteousness. And you have to actually factor into all of your discussions that you might actually be wrong. And dialogue might be the first step to fix that. I got to tell you, this is so foreign to our culture right now. I mean, so foreign. There are so few cases where I see someone say, well, this is what I believe is true. This is what I believe, policy-wise we ought to be doing. And there's people over there that completely disagree with me. I think we need to sit down and have a good, meaty discussion about this. It's nearly impossible to see those things happening. Nearly impossible. Instead, the one side paints the other side as being immoral and unethical, and there's no reason to have a discourse because after all, everything they believe is just stupid and dirtbaggy. No, we might all be wrong to some degree. Let's have a dialogue on it. And when you have a dialogue, you can place the things down on the table. You can say, wait a second, why do you think like that? Show me what led you to that conclusion. Let's talk about that. That might be interesting. I might be wrong. Can you fill me in on what? Have you seen that happen in the press recently? I haven't. It's just gone. It's gone. It's because there's a hubris, pride that goes right alongside this, I'm right. Man, you're wrong. So you don't do that kind of thing. But it could very well be that we're all wrong. And the humility that God brings us to, especially in this situation, is the fact, gosh, we could be righteous and we can be wrong. Let's talk this through and see. So there's something about this dialogue thing that as you listen to someone with respect, laying down why we see what we see, and the other side says, well, this is what we see, and then you put all that and you mush it together, both sides can actually sort of change their perspective because they're seeing more information than they had by themselves. That's a very healthy, that's a democratic process is what that is. Unfortunately, it's dying today. But even though they were prone to misunderstanding right here, they had dialogue. Remember Phineas, who's the high priest at the time? He says, okay, I'm going to bring with me a bunch of leaders from our side, our 9.5 tribes from our side. We're just going to talk to these people. Let's go talk to these people. This is while they have armed armies standing there in Shiloh. I mean, they're ready to fight. No, listen, let's go talk to them first. And they go talk to them, and they say, look, here's what we're seeing. We're seeing you guys building this altar. It looks like it's a competitive altar to the one altar where we do sacrifices by the tabernacle. This is what it looks like to us. Did you hear him say it? This is what it looks like to us. And if that's what's going on, you guys shouldn't be doing this. This is wrong. This is against everything we know to be right. This is why we're arming for war. You just can't do this. This is what we're seeing. And if you go back and look at the passage, that's all they say. This is what we're seeing. And this is what we're interpreting from that. And then they pause. And then, they throw the conch to the other side. And they say, okay, listen, this is all we're doing. We're afraid that your kids would think that our kids are leaving the Lord because we're living on the wrong side of Jordan. And, if they're snarky, they could say, oh, and it's happening today. See, we were true. Ah. They didn't be snarky. They said, this is what we're doing. This is our intent. This is why we built this thing. We are not sacrificing here. We believe sacrifice has to be at the tabernacle. We're not. No, this is not what this is. So they just, without any kind of emotional language, just described this is what our intent was. But this is what we were anticipating. And I think when Phineas and the guys on the left heard what was being anticipated, and they realized that that's exactly what they had done, it kind of bit them in the core. They went, yeah, I get it. So they both shared their two sides. That's simply what it was. There wasn't great oratory. They just shared what was going on. One guy showed what they perceived. The other side explained what they were doing. And in one interchange, Phineas and those guys said, oh, okay, we're good with that. Whew, Civil War gone. Just like that. Civil War gone. Just gone. And we have no sense in the rest of the history of Israel that the people on the wrong side of the tracks were ever misinterpreted as not being part of God's family. Ever. I mean, there you go. And in fact, that memorial that stood there, they could probably use with their kids later and add to that. Originally, they were supposed to say, when our kids see that, we'll tell them, we built this here when we left the left side of the Jordan so that people wouldn't think that the people on the right side of the Jordan were dirtbags, just to remind ourselves. And now we can actually tell you the story of the day we built it, how it actually triggered that response in our cousins on the left side. So watch out. This memorial stone is to the fact that we are not leaving God just because we live on the wrong side of the tracks. And they could add that to the story. How about another one? If you take offense, taking offense and blocking dialogue can lead to war. So I mean, think about if they had reacted poorly. Righteous indignation. We see you guys building an altar that's kind of a different place to sacrifice. Oh, yeah, what do you guys know? What do you guys know about what we're intending to do? You have no clue why we built that. You guys are stupid. You have never even asked us any questions. Get out of here. We hate you guys. We're going to fight you. You're not going to fight us. See, they could have overreacted in a really bad way. I say that because I got to not make eye contact. Some of us react like that when our righteous actions are misunderstood. And someone makes a presumption about our motivations. That's ungodly. And then we get indignant. We say, you haven't got a clue why I did that. You're totally wrong. We're not the dirtbags. You're the dirtbags. Yeah, see, we do that because you know the truth of the matter. You know what your motivation is. They're just guessing. You know what your motivation is. How dare they judge your motivation? They haven't got a clue why you did that. You need to just slap them around a little bit and tell them they're being stupid. Except we're often in their shoes as well. Right? I mean, we do this. This is so human nature, it just blows me away. We do this. And in fixing the situation, if you in your indignant, righteous wrath strike out at them because they have misjudged your heart, you have just stopped the whole reconciliation process. Entirely. And you know what your reaction is all based around serving? Your pride. So in these kinds of misunderstandings, when you're misunderstood and you know the motivations of your heart, don't react in pride. How dare you? So don't do that. In fact, in these situations, I've had to train myself over the years when I've gone through these things, is to tell my pride, hey, just calm down. It's not about you. Okay, they've misjudged it. But you can misjudge others as well. So just chill. Just be chill, you know. So they got you wrong. So they read your heart wrong. Yeah, what's the big deal? God sees your heart. Let's just leave it for, let's just tone it down, take it down from 11 down to 1, and let's just talk our way through this. That's what we need to do. That's what we need to do. But you have to actually shout down your pride. Because your pride will rise up in righteous indignation. I'm right, you're dirtbags, right? That's what you want to do. And the guys on the right side of the Jordan did not do that. Amen. I'm so proud of them. I am so proud of them. They didn't react in an angry, righteous indignation, because that would have stopped the whole dialogue and that would have guaranteed civil war. The very thing they didn't want would have happened because of their pride. Which is why I say in this situation, all through the life of Israel and in our life walking with the Lord, your biggest enemy is you. And the biggest little enemy inside of you is your pride. It'll get in the way of everything. There's really no replacement for understanding that there's a humility we have as followers of the Lord that pride has no place in. What we have is not because we deserved it or owned it or because we're hot people or we're really great in any sense. It's not because of that at all. Even God told Israel, look, I didn't choose you as a race of people because you're anything great. In fact, you're kind of irritating. He says this. It's in there. It's in the beginning. You guys are irritating. And it's not because of anything inherent in who you are that I picked you. It's just because I love you. So there's nothing about us that's inherently great either in that sense. So when someone misjudges who you are, don't let that pride come up and say, yeah, but do you know who I am? You don't even know my heart. I'm doing something that's very gracious and godly and loving, and you're misjudging me. You're just wrong. You're a dirtbag, and I'm righteous. So just take that out of your whole mentality, okay? Because I guarantee you will be misjudged based on a righteous action you take. Don't lash back. I've had some very coordinated attacks on me. And in the early parts of when I've gone through these things, that pride did well up and say, man, they are just so stinking wrong. They haven't got a clue. And it started to bubble up. And unfortunately, it did contaminate some of the discussions. But then later on, after God convicted me of that, said, Jim, look, buddy, it's not about you. Let that pride thing go. It's not about you. Oh, okay. Then when it happened in successions after that and it got more fiery and more unjust, I could say to my pride, hey, Jim, it's not about you. Quit defending yourself. Just tell them what's going on. That's all you got to do. That's all you got to do. Even though it seems like you're on the unjust side of the tracks. Injustice has come into you. Chill it. Just don't do it. Talk that pride down. Also, taking offense can cause others to sin. You remember how Phineas said at the end of the discussion, thanks for explaining this, because you've you've prevented us from offending God, basically. Because if they had then gone in and invaded under a false pretense, they would have been guilty. Right. Do you realize that your bad response can cause other people to sin? I've done it. where I you know what this is like, right? So say you go to someone else and say, you're doing something really wrong. And you're completely misjudging what they're doing. You're doing something really, really wrong. And then they come back at you and say, oh yeah, we're right. You're wrong. You don't know what my heart's thinking. You don't know what this is all about, you know? And then your response to that is, oh yeah, I know what I'm talking about. I'm sure you're doing this. Bam, bam. And you start a fist fight and you get on the floor and you start rolling around and it gets worse. You yourself, in that reaction, caused the fist fight. I mean, are you with me? This happens on both sides of the argument. So you can prevent the civil war by not overreacting when you're misjudged. But keep in mind that when you take offense and you overreact based on your righteousness, you can cause the other person to sin. When I came to understand that, then when conflict started coming up, I started to say to myself, when I'd pray to God, I'd say, God, I want to react in a godly way right here. And I want to react in a way, number one, that I'm not defending myself and defending my own pride. And number two, I want to do it in a way so that I don't cause them to sin. Have you ever been in a conflict and prayed that? When they're ready to smack you around because they've misjudged you? God, I want to react in a way so that they don't sin. Yeah. Now we're talking about like graduate level Christianity. Because this is so against our natures. I mean, it's so against our natures. So against our natures. And yet, when they struck Jesus, he didn't respond. When people strike you, do you respond? Yeah, because it's all about my pride and they've misjudged me. Look, if they're going to respond to Jesus that way, who is righteous in every sense and misjudged in every sense, and his response is unlike ours, we need to start asking Jesus to make that response part of our lives. Because we want to reflect that kind of graciousness. And in the sense that it may be that by God's design, I need to stay under this unjust claim so that I can bring good to my accusers. That's not the way we're wired, but that's the way God's wired, and that's what he's trying to create in you and in me. He's trying to do that. Because after all, Christ, when he stayed under that pressure and that injustice, stayed there for our benefit. He's our model, and he's recreating that heart in us. So when you are unjustly dealt with and someone misjudges your motivations in your heart, and you're righteous through and through with your motivations, think about the fact that your next response might actually not only bring them away from sinning more, but might actually start the process of redemption for them. That's such a big deal. Such a big deal. That's at the core of what Jesus says. If they strike you on the cheek, give them the other one to hit too. Why? Because you're masochists? No, because you're starting the process of understanding redemption and forgiveness. and in flesh. So, I mean, that's just here in big letters. I think I got two more. Oh, yeah, this is the one that you can cause others to sin. Remember, Phineas said, now you have delivered the people of Israel from the hand of the Lord. We would have been in trouble. You delivered us from overreacting. Good for you. Thanks for just discussing this clearly. Because you kept us from sinning any further. By the way, that's an actual picture of Phineas. And stop that. Okay. And we need to proactively declare our love of God, because remember, that was the end of the response from the guys that lived on the right side. They said, no, the Lord's God. The Lord's God. The Lord's God. We're good. We haven't departed from that. And I look at this and I think about the fact, I seldom make that the center of my discussions when I'm in the middle of an unjust conversation. But they did. Now, it was part of the charge, because the guys on the left said the guys on the right were leaving God as evidence from making another place to sacrifice. So they had to kind of say, no, we're not doing that. But it challenged me to think, maybe I need to bring God more in the center of discussions, period, in all this kind of stuff, period. And when I started thinking about this, I had a discussion with someone yesterday here they're having church problems. And I said, church problems about what? Well, it's all this dinky, stupid stuff. I said, yeah, it's never about you disagreeing about who God is. Yeah. So why don't you start, I said, I was thinking about this, why don't you start with going to those people you're having these disagreements with and say, can we back up the truck for a second? Can we go back and say, let's start talking about who God is, why we love God, what he's done in our lives. Can we go back to this basis first? And then we can talk about the color of the carpets, or whether we need, cabinets in the kitchen, and all that kind of, those weren't the issues, but those are the issues that tear up churches. Important issues, not who's God. Yeah. So it just challenged me right here, because when he said this, Phineas responded by saying, that sounds right. I think you guys' hearts are in the right place. So there's something very disarming when we have conflicts, especially conflicts within the church, which we are not immune to, even though we're all righteous. We're not immune to that. We just need to say, let's stop for a second. Let's go back. Let's remind ourselves about how great God's love is for us, how none of us deserved what he's brought to us. Let's use that to tune down our pride, because even while we're yet sinners, Christ died for us. Go figure. Isn't that great? Yeah, that is great. God's been very good to us. He's very, very good to us. When you go back to that as a common point, it tends to snuff out pride that's emerging in these conversations. It does. It's a very practical way to snuff out pride, because you have two emergent pride emotions coming up on both sides, and then they start hurling abusive comments at each other, and then they start taking swings at each other, and before you know it, you're on the ground wrestling with each other and hitting each other in the eyeballs. So, and it's pride. It's pride. Pride has no place in the presence of God. So when you go back and say, it's nothing we did that earned God's love for us. It's nothing who we are that says God loves us. Isn't that great? That is great. We have no cause to have pride for anything. Well, then why are we fighting each other right now? Like pride makes a difference. Pride is really a bad thing. I don't know how to say that big enough. And in this particular case, it could have fomented a civil war. And today, it foments civil wars all the time. And by the way, civil wars are started many times over forgotten trivial reasons. I've seen churches split, and they'll split and then years later say, so what? Why did we split? Wow. I don't know. It was something, because it was really important at the time, because we started saying nasty things about each other. Well, I mean, that happens a lot. And if it goes one more generation, the kids don't even know. Yeah, we split from that church. Why? Well, I don't know. It's something. Trivial issues, and when I say trivial, I mean things that have nothing to do with the nature of who God is and our trust in him. Trivial issues are the best place for Satan to take these big crowbars and lever you into conflict and to trigger your pride and have you start hitting each other in the eyes and split apart for the kingdom of God. It's the trivial issues. It's the trivial issues. I could make you a list and you'd say, no, that didn't happen. Yes, that happened. I know a church that happened to. Trivial issues, because it seems like it's not important, and that's the difference. That's why Satan's very good at using trivial issues to start civil wars amongst us, because one side thinks it's important and the other side doesn't think it's important. It's not really a conflict about the issue. It's a conflict about whether the issue is important. And do you know what it's like When someone comes to you about an issue that you think is really important, they say, oh, that doesn't matter. And your reaction is, what? Of course it matters. Nah. Trivial issues. It's not about the color of the carpets. It's about the fact that some people care and others don't. And they get offended and their pride hikes. And that's what happens. So Satan's very good. Satan knows that if he tries to separate you and cause a civil war over your disagreements about the nature of God, it probably won't get there, because that in itself ends up reducing pride if you focus on who God is. But if you go on the trivial issues, man, that's a pride big zone right there. And he can take you down. So we really just need to be careful about that. It's a big deal. So as just a practical step, next time you find yourself unjustly judged by someone, stop the conversation for a second and say, we'll get back to that. Can we talk about the loving kindness of God? Isn't it an amazing thing that while we were sinners, he died for us? Isn't that astonishing? I mean, isn't that astonishing? Isn't that astonishing, the people that he surrounds us with, that normally in life we wouldn't be smart enough to know that these people be a blessing to us, and yet he does that and we don't deserve that? And that these people still love me even when I'm a dirtbag? Isn't that great what God does in our midst? I mean, go back to that. Sorry, it's a fly. I'm going to aspirate one in just a second and choke wildly. So this is just a very practical step. It sounds kind of goofy, but I'm telling you, it's very powerful. The Lord is God. Oh, there's an epilogue. Aren't you happy? I told you that this issue doesn't go away in the life of Israel. In fact, this is sort of the central core of the last half of the entire Old Testament. This kind of a thing is a big deal. But this time it doesn't happen left and right. So here's the map we've been using so far. It's got the modern markings on it and stuff like that. And we've been looking at the left and right tribes, because in the settlement, that's what really caused the conflict. And the idea that the classic God areas on the left and the unclassic God areas on the right. But it's all part of Abraham's promise. So that's just their short-sightedness. But now what's going to happen is a north-south. So if you fast forward a couple of centuries, it doesn't take long, a couple of centuries after they've settled, look what happens. This is in 1 Kings 12. David has come and gone, Solomon has come and gone, and now there's a power struggle, and a guy in the north named Jeroboam, he took counsel and made 2 calves of gold. Oh, no, really? Yes. He made 2 calves of gold, and he said to the people, you've gone up to Jerusalem long enough, because they would do sacrifices and worship in Jerusalem. You've gone up to Jerusalem long enough. Behold your gods. Showing him the 2 calves. Oh, Israel, these are the 2 gods who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. Oh, man. Shipwreck. Red alert. And he said, he set one of them in Bethel. You remember Bethel? That's right next to Ai, where they had that battle. And that's the southern end of this red thing right here. And he put the other one up in Dan, where Dan eventually moved from the coast after they couldn't handle the Philistines. The other he put in Dan. And then this thing became a sin. And the people went as far as Dan to be before one. They went worshiping in front of these golden calves. Oh my gosh. This is just, depending on how you date it, maybe 300, 400 years after the events we're seeing in Joshua. Didn't take long. And Satan couldn't use the left-right Jordan issue to separate them. He just waited until the more godly kings like David and his son, who eventually went south and actually, contributed to this mess, until they were dead, and that kind of godly leadership sort of evaporated. And then these jerks in the north said, we don't need the people in the south. We'll make our own temple. In fact, we'll make some golden calves. People in the south have golden calves? No, but we do. And we'll worship at those. Yeah, that's a good idea. Then we don't need the people in the south. So he also made temples in high places. Oh, man, no. Because when God said to make the temple in David and Solomon's time, there's only one. There's only one temple. There's not multiples. Multiple temples are an abomination to God. I let that sink in for some of your backgrounds. He also made temples on high places, and he appointed priests, what? From among the people who were not of the Levites. Let that sink in for a second. Yes. They were not Levites, because the only Levites could do the temple stuff. And Jeroboam appointed a feast on the 15th day of the 8th month, like the feast that was in Judah. I think it's Feast of Tabernacles. I forgot to look at it. So they made kind of an alternate feast at the same time of year. And he offered sacrifices on that altar. Oh, this is why they were getting ready to go to civil war today. They offered sacrifices on the altar. So he did in Bethel, sacrificing to the calves that he made, and he placed in Bethel the priests, the high places that he had made. Oh, dude. Oh, crash and burn. Crash and burn. And because they wanted to be separate politically from the people in the south, they had to go as far as to say, well, the people in the south, they own the temple and they own the places we're sacrificing. They own the whole religion. Well, we can't go down there anymore. We'll make our own. Yeah, that's a good idea. We'll make old golden calves. Yeah, that's a good idea. And we'll put them in the north and south. We'll spread them through our country so they're equally accessible so people don't have to go far to the nearest temple. Let that sink in for a second. Yeah. So, and then God speaks of what happened. This is God actually saying what really happened in their hearts. They've forsaken me, and they worshipped Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians. Sidon, by the way, is way up on the coast on the left. Chemosh, the god of Moab, that's lands generally on the right side of the Jordan in the south. Milcom, the god of the Ammonites, that's all through the country. And they have not walked in my ways, doing what's right in my sight, keeping my statutes and my rules. They just haven't done it. So you see, the beef that God has with these people, we come back to how we started. Prosperity in the land is based on relationship with God. It's not based on the land's ability to support them. Oh, so this society and community that God wants to tell the world he has in mind for actually anybody in the world is this society and community that's formed around God being at its center and a relationship between the people and that God. That's the model. That's what was supposed to always be in Israel. That was supposed to be the message of Israel to the world. But then you get to hear to Jeroboam and they just kind of blow the whole thing up. Go, nah, we'll make some golden calves. And at that point, God says, look, the land of promise, the promised land, is the promise not just of physical land. It's the promise that you will be my people and I'll be your God and I will live in your midst. And as I live in your midst, we will have fellowship together and I'll protect you and I'll provide for you and I will bring life as long as you let me be the sovereign in your community. But the minute you don't allow me to be the sovereign in your community, I say, well, okay, I'll back off. And so God backs off from the northern people. When they say, we don't need God, we got golden calves. And this is the train wreck they were trying to prevent in Joshua, that they misinterpreted with these stones. This is the train wreck they were trying to prevent. And now it's come full force just a couple centuries later. And these guys in the north end up getting taken away by the Assyrians because God basically says, look, if you don't want me anymore, then you don't want the land of promise where I'm going to live with you. So if you want the Assyrian gods, you want everyone else's gods, great. I'll give them to you, full force. And he let the Assyrians come into the country and literally capture the northern half of the country and take them away into slavery so that they could spend their full time, 24/7, 365 days a year, worshiping the gods of the Assyrians. And a little voice in the background says, so how did that work out for you? Bad, really bad. Now, if you think the people in the South are immune to this, 150 years later, 150, you'd think they would learn from this, they wouldn't do this. 150 years later, Nebuchadnezzar from Babylon comes down and he takes them off into captivity as well, and the place is empty because God said, I will be your God if you'll be my people. You reject me? Well, bye. Bye. Now, it's not a permanent divorce. It's like a separation in a sense. It's God saying, look, if that's what you want, if you want what the other nations have, if you want gods that aren't even gods, I'll let you really experience that. And you tell me how that works out. You tell me how that works out. The gods who aren't even gods. And so God lets them go. What we just saw right there, being taken into captivity, and the warnings about what's going on, and the predictions that you don't want to go this place, that is literally the second half of the Old Testament. When you talk about guys like Isaiah and Jeremiah, these prophets, these are guys, and Ezekiel, these are guys that God said, I need you to go tell the people to not do this thing or else it's going to go bad. So they go out there and they tell them, listen, don't do this, it's going to go bad. The idea of the promised land is a promise of God to live in your midst. And if you reject him, you're not going to, no, don't do this. And so you see Isaiah and you see Jeremiah, and they're trying to forestall this, but God tells these prophets ahead of time, a couple of them, and he says, look, I want you to tell them don't do this because it's not good for them. This is not productive for life for them if you disregard me as God. but they're not going to listen to you. How would you like to be one of those prophets? I need you to tell them this is wrong, but yeah, they're not going to listen to you. Well, then why am I doing it? But this is the broken heart of the prophets you see and this is literally the second half of the Old Testament. Their hearts are breaking. They're showing God's breaking heart on their behalf. And they're saying, this is not part of the promise. If you'll be my people, I'll be your God. But when you stop being my people, I'll stop being your God. And he lets them go. Now, fortunately, while they're in those places off over there, where they're in Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon, the Assyria, they suddenly get an idea of what God's intention was in the land. And there are some prophets then, they even Isaiah, the last half, he says, life can be good and life will be good. But again, it depends on where you place God in your life. That's where it's going to come from. Where you place it has nothing to do with the land flowing with milk and honey, and it's just a great land. It's about where you put God in your life. And when you get that straight again, God will bring you back. Daniel, you know Daniel? Daniel got taken in the Babylonian captivity. Guys in the south? He was a very godly guy, and he kept being faithful to God in all of that stuff. And even through Daniel, it became apparent that this captivity was only going to be for like 70 years. And a lot of people are figuring this out. So we're just kind of figuring this out. So eventually God brings them back. That's the very last part of the Old Testament. They come back to Jerusalem. They rebuild the wall in Jerusalem, the defensive wall that was torn down. That's Nehemiah. So these are the little prophets at the end and stuff like that. That's the whole half of the Old Testament is about the fact that they decided to renege on the promise God made to them. God didn't renege. They reneged. They pushed God out of the center of their lives. And God said, okay, I'll step back and give you what you want. The gods that don't even exist. And I'll let you live in the midst of them your entire lives. They finally come back. They trickle back at the very end of the Old Testament. And just before we get about 4 centuries of silence at the end of the Old Testament before the New, they're back in the land, but they're kind of twisted. And what you get when you see Jesus come on the scene is a religious culture that still doesn't quite get it anymore. They think that they're back in the land because they're racially Jews. And so it's coming to them. And Jesus says, no. Even to John the Baptist, if you want sons of Abraham, God can make sons of Abraham just like that. It's based on belief. It's based on faith. It's not based on race. So even when you get to that, so I just gave you the entire history of the last half of the Old Testament. But that's what it's about. That's what it's all about. The key core central issue is, if you want life that's meant to be the way God wants life to be, put God in the center as the sovereign of your life. Amen. That's the message of the Old Testament. And hey, that's the message of the New Testament. Really? Is it that simple? It's really that simple. If you'll be my people, I'll be your God. If you won't be my people, look out. I'll withdraw all the benefits I'm bringing to you. By the way, this has a very close metaphor to the marriage contract and all the human relationships we have. It's always a mutual thing. It's like, if you'll be my wife, I'll be your husband. It's sort of like that. It's this I forget the word all of a sudden. Co-promise to one another. But there's this intention that the two would be exclusively aimed toward each other, and that's what makes marriage work. It's never one side in that sense. It's two sides saying mutually at the same time, I'm for you and only for you. And that's the thing that God had with Israel. In fact, when you get into Jeremiah, the weeping prophet who also writes Lamentations as he's watching all this happen, he gets to this very hopeful section in Jeremiah 31, which we actually use as our password here to the internet, in Jeremiah 31. And he says, as he recounts his history with Israel and his heartbreak over what's going on, he says, I took them out of Egypt, and I loved them, and I was a husband to them. But they still betrayed me. And they went after other husbands. That's the message of Hosea, the minor prophet. He actually tells Hosea, you need to actually demonstrate this to my people, that what they've done is they violated their marriage contract with God. So I want you to marry Gomer. What a horrible name. I want you to marry Gomer, who's well known in the village for being a very loose woman. And Hosea says back to God, but God, she's not going to be faithful to me. And God says, yeah, I know. Well, why do you want to do this? because I want them to see you and understand that this is what Israel's doing to me. They're being a Gomer to me. But the interesting thing about Hosea in that whole metaphor about how they left the Lord and didn't leave him in the center of their, is he said to Hosea we were getting a whole survey of Hosea now. He said to Hosea, even when she's sleeping and living with some other guys, I want you to deliver food and raisins to the doorstep there, and I still want you to provide for your wife, even though she's being an idiot. And in fact, throughout the history of Israel, God's still there in the background. He's still providing. He's still being patient. He's waiting for her heart to come back. And that's what God does with Israel. And thank God that's what he does with us. Because even while we were sinning, Christ died for us. This is the theme of redemption and reconciliation all through it. But don't mistake. You can misunderstand things. You can drive God out of the center of your life. And when you do that, God is not obligated to bring the love and the big life that he wants. Jesus said, I came to give him life and to give it abundantly. And that's true. That's what the intention in the promised land was. That's God's intention with us. But it comes down to one single issue. It's and it's relational. Will you allow God to be the central sovereign in your life?
Yes.
Old Testament, New Testament, Old Covenant, New Covenant. Will you let God be the central sovereign in your life? Which just simply means, God, I'm yours. I'm yours. And I want to benefit from your loving kindness to me and your intentions, your promises to me for life and abundant life. I want to be part of the life that you bring, not the life that I conceive. I'm all yours. I'm all yours forever. I'm with you. It's a total surrender. It's a total yielding to this God who wants to love us with great abundance. And yet, like Israel, we often say, I don't know, land's pretty good, milk and honey, we can stay here. Who needs God? Ha! And God says, you need God, and he pulls away. Okay, next week, do I have what's on next week? I don't know. Yeah, next time we're going to talk about lesson 2 about living in the land, as if that wasn't hard enough. But it does get very clear, because what I've just told you about the central core of the issue about abundant life with God is exactly what Joshua is going to challenge him with before we finish the book. And he's going to spell it out. And if you're listening today, he already said it once when he was talking to the people who live on the right, about obeying God, about letting him be the central sovereign. And he's going to take 2 chapters. So next week we'll look at the last 2 chapters, and we'll see what it is that'll make it so that you can live in a land of promise with God in its center, and how abundant life can be like that. But you do have to be up on your game in terms of following him. It's a big deal. But he loves you and he doesn't want to pull away. But he'll use every facility he can think of to wake you out of your slumber of thinking God's not necessary. He'll use everything he can think of. And that's what he did with Israel. So we'll do that next week. And we're going to sing I'll Not Be Shaken. Because you don't want the circumstances of life to pull you away from God. You want him to draw you to God. So again, I'll just give you one last injunctive. And this is just a really big deal. We talked about misunderstandings today. The practical takeaway is this. You will, with righteous and godly motivations, be misunderstood. So don't say I didn't warn you. Because when it happens, you go, whoa. Oh, that's right. Jim said this happened. So when that happens, your reaction can not only keep the other people who are accusing you from further sin, but it can actually stop the civil war that's brewing. Your reaction is a big deal. And by the way, too, when you're in the other foot and you see someone doing something that looks ungodly because you're righteous, you judge them. Jesus says you got to take that board out of your own eye before you can see the speck that's in theirs. That's what he's talking about. When you see that happening, realize that even though your righteous viewing and your insight and your judgment might be rightly motivated, you might be entirely wrong, because we don't know everything. So just hold back and do like Phineas said, and you walk up to him and you say, what are you doing? Because this is what it looks like to us. That's all you got to do. Such a practical thing. And the outcome, if you don't do those things, is civil war between you and other people. And I can tell you people who've been in civil war for decades because they didn't do this. And churches that are at civil war for decades. So just take a tip from them. Okay, let me just stop talking and we'll sing our way out. Father in heaven, we thank you for your practical word. We thank you for the fact that it speaks in a way that is so identifiable. I mean, this is us. This could have been us in their shoes so easily. And Lord, it's humbling to understand that our motivations, even though from our own perspective can be righteous and can be moral and ethical, can be so easily misunderstood and can be leveraged by the evil one to cause disaster in our relationships. We recognize that, we see that, we identify with that, we know how that happens. So Lord, in all these conflicts, we pray that through your Spirit that lives in us, that you would pound down our rising pride in those situations, that you'd allow us to loosen our tongues to have civil discourse, and that in that process, we might come to understand each other's hearts better and come to understand the basis for our humility, which is your love for us. Lord, we are so prone to this. We are just so prone to this. And we want you to be glorified in our lives, and most so in our conflicts, so that people understand that there's a God who's been dealt unjustly, whose love overflows and continues to work on the behalf of the benefit of those who bring that injustice. Lord, may that be the key mark of our lives as well. That kind of moderated response that reflects the loving kindness of God and that brings restoration and opens the doors to the understanding of redemption and forgiveness. Lord, may that be part of our lives in the gritty injustice that we experience all the time. And Lord, make us slow to judge, quick to talk. And Lord, finally, I pray that you would continue to remind our hearts about the fact that life does not come from our material goods or the place that we find ourselves. We might think that we're living in a land of milk and honey, but the issue is that life in abundance comes from allowing you to be the sovereign of our domain, to allow you to have sway over everything that happens, to put our trust into you, to look to you for all that provides in life, for our protection, for provision, for all that you are, and all that you promise, so that we can live in whatever place we're in a land of promise. Because you promised that if you'll be my people, I'll be your God, wherever we are. So thank you for these great words. These chapters in Joshua stagger us and draw us into your loving kindness and your patience with us. You are so good to us. We have really no cause to come to fisticuffs with each other over issues that have nothing to do with that. You are so good. So thanks now in Jesus' name. Amen.